It was a quiet afternoon at the luxury restaurant, nestled in the heart of the city. The hum of soft conversations blended with the clinking of fine china. The air was thick with the scent of freshly baked bread and rich, aromatic wine. A few high-end patrons dined in the elegant setting, unaware of the strange turn of events that was about to unfold. In the corner of the restaurant, a man sat alone, his face tense and distant. His name was Richard Blackwood, a name known across the world for his incredible wealth and powerful influence. Billionaire, CEO, magnate. People knew his face from the cover of magazines and the headlines of newspapers. His wealth was immeasurable, and his success was a testament to years of hard work, strategy, and a certain ruthless edge that had made him the king of his empire. Yet, despite all that, there was a coldness in his eyes, a depth of loneliness no amount of money could fill. He had everything: a sprawling mansion, a private jet, cars that cost more than most people's homes. But there was one thing that haunted him: the absence of true connection. The man who had everything had somehow lost sight of the most important things in life: love, warmth, and human kindness. Richard's son, Leo, was the only connection that kept him tethered to the world. Leo, a bright boy with an infectious smile, had been born with a severe disability, one that made life harder for him than most people could understand. The boy's condition meant he was wheelchair-bound, unable to move his legs, speak clearly, or take care of his basic needs. For Richard, this was a constant reminder of how fragile life could be, how things could change in an instant. Richard had tried everything to give Leo the best life possible, but no amount of money could change the fact that his son would never experience the world in the way other children did. He often thought about what could have been if only Leo had been born healthy, if only he could run and play like other kids. The pain of seeing his son struggle every day made him distant, closing himself off from everyone around him. Even with the most expensive therapists and state-of-the-art equipment, nothing seemed to ease the ache in his heart. That afternoon, Richard decided to take Leo out for lunch. He didn't know why he chose this particular restaurant. Perhaps he was trying to escape the walls of his own mansion, or perhaps he simply wanted a change of pace. Leo, with his wide brown eyes, looked up at his father, his face lit with excitement at the prospect of leaving the house. Richard wheeled Leo through the grand entrance, and the sight of the restaurant's opulence seemed to momentarily lift the boy's spirits. It was as if the buzz of activity and the elegance around them brought a small sense of normalcy to Leo's world. They were seated at a window-side table, the view overlooking the city skyline. Leo looked out, his eyes tracing the movement of cars, people, and life outside. He didn't speak, but his gaze seemed filled with wonder. Richard placed a hand gently on his son's shoulder and ordered for them both, his mind lost in thought as he stared out at the city. He rarely let himself show any weakness, but the pain of seeing his son in that chair every day was becoming unbearable. Across the room, a young woman named Emma worked tirelessly. She was in her early 20s, dressed in a simple uniform. Her face, though tired, radiated kindness. Emma had been a waitress at this upscale restaurant for a year, working long hours for a modest paycheck. She wasn't wealthy, far from it, but she had learned the art of resilience early in life. Growing up in a small, struggling family had shaped her into someone who worked harder than most, someone who made the best out of what she had. But the job, while decent, wasn't what Emma dreamed of. She often imagined a life far from the clatter of plates and the constant demands of customers. She had goals. She wanted to be someone important, someone who could make a difference. She just didn't know how to get there. Her shifts were long, and the hours drained her. But she kept going, telling herself that things would get better, that someday, somehow, her life would change. She noticed the father and son as soon as they entered the restaurant. The young boy in the wheelchair caught her attention immediately. There was something about the way he sat, looking out at the world, that made her heart ache. She could tell he was disabled, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet intelligence, a depth, that resonated with her. As Emma approached their table, she couldn't help but notice how quiet Richard seemed. His stern, almost emotionless demeanor made it clear that he wasn't there for small talk. But Leo, his son, was different. His gaze met hers, and for a moment she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. The boy was still, his expression soft but filled with unspoken thoughts. "Good afternoon," Emma said gently, trying to sound cheerful. She handed them the menu, her smile warm but reserved. "Can I get you something to drink?" Richard barely glanced at her. His tone was polite but distant. "Water for both of us," he replied. Emma nodded and moved away, feeling the heavy atmosphere around them. She returned to the kitchen, her mind swirling with thoughts of the boy in the wheelchair. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their story. But the moment passed, and she continued with her work. As the day went on, Emma kept glancing at the table in the corner. Richard had barely spoken to anyone, but Leo seemed to notice every detail. His eyes sparkled whenever a new dish was brought out or when another customer walked by. It was as though he was trying to absorb the world through his senses, to experience everything he couldn't physically be a part of. The lunch passed quietly, but Emma felt an inexplicable connection to the boy. Her heart went out to him. She could tell he had a good heart, even though he couldn't speak, and the way he looked at the world made her feel like there was so much more to him than his disability. It was when Richard asked for the check that things took an unexpected turn. The moment she placed the bill on the table, Leo did something that caught her completely off guard. He reached out with trembling hands, and Emma, without thinking, gently helped him steady his hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and in that moment, their eyes met. There was a silent exchange, a kind of understanding that Emma couldn't quite explain. Leo's face softened, and his lips parted as if he was trying to say something, but the words never came. Emma swallowed hard, unsure of what had just happened. Richard, who had been looking out the window, turned his attention to the interaction. There was a flicker in his eyes, something akin to surprise, but it was gone almost immediately. He paid the bill and stood up to leave, but before they could exit, Leo's soft voice broke the silence. "Thank you," Leo whispered, barely audible. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone thank her. She looked down at him, her own voice catching in her throat. "You're welcome," she said softly, her words tinged with emotion. "I hope your day gets better." Richard turned to look at her, and for the first time, there was a softness in his gaze. It was fleeting, but it was there. He nodded to Emma, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Then, with a deep breath, he wheeled Leo out of the restaurant, leaving Emma standing there, her mind reeling from what had just occurred. Later that night, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the boy, his quiet words, and the way he had looked at her. It was as though that brief moment had unlocked something within her, a spark of hope, of possibility, something that she hadn't felt in a long time. She realized in that instant that there was more to life than her struggles and her endless cycle of work. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to make a real difference in the world. The next morning, Emma received a call. It was from the manager at the restaurant, informing her that Richard Blackwood wanted to meet with her. Her heart raced. What could he possibly want? Was he going to offer her more hours? A promotion? She had no idea that this was the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. Little did she know, Richard Blackwood was on the edge of a revelation himself. The brief interaction with Emma, with his son's whispered words, had left a mark on him. He found himself wondering, was there more to life than just business? Was there a way to truly live? To connect with the world, not from a place of power, but from a place of humanity? Richard's life, as he knew it, was about to change. And so, too, would Emma's. The door was open. But would either of them have the courage to walk through it? Emma sat nervously in her modest apartment, gripping her phone tightly after receiving the call. Richard Blackwood wanted to meet with her. The thought of the billionaire, whose face was plastered across business magazines, wanting to speak to her, a simple waitress from a small, struggling family, seemed surreal. She couldn't quite process it, but the weight of the moment hit her all at once. What did he want? Why would he reach out to her? Her thoughts raced. She wasn't anyone special. She was just a waitress, someone who served people their food and then went back to her routine of emptying trays and taking orders. Sure, she had a small ambition to make a difference, to build a better life for herself. But what did she have to offer a man like Richard Blackwood? Yet, a part of her couldn't deny that the brief exchange at the restaurant had left a deep impression on her. Leo's whispered gratitude had shaken something loose inside her, something that had been buried under the weight of daily struggle and self-doubt. For once, she felt seen. For once, she felt like she had made a difference in someone's life. She had given Leo a small moment of comfort, but the impact it had on her was far greater than she could have imagined. And then there was Richard. There was something in his eyes when he looked at her, a fleeting moment of recognition, of vulnerability. She wondered if he saw something in her that she didn't yet see in herself. Maybe that was why he wanted to meet her. Maybe he sensed something, some potential for change, both in her and in himself. The next morning, Emma stood in front of her closet, staring at the few outfits she had. She didn't have anything fancy or expensive. She'd never needed it. But for this meeting, she wanted to look presentable. She chose a simple, elegant black dress that hugged her figure in a way that felt both comfortable and confident. She pulled her hair into a neat ponytail and added a touch of makeup to her face, something she rarely bothered with. For once, she allowed herself to believe that she deserved to look her best. As she walked into the high-end restaurant where Richard had asked to meet her, she felt out of place. The gleaming floors, the sparkling chandeliers, and the polished wood made her feel small in comparison. It was a far cry from the cramped, dimly lit kitchen where she worked every day. She paused at the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't belong here, but she had no choice. She had to face whatever came next. A waiter greeted her with a polite smile and escorted her to a private table at the back of the restaurant. As they approached, Emma saw Richard already seated, his expression unreadable as he stared out the window. His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccable, and there was an air of command about him that only added to the distance she already felt. She hesitated for a moment before taking the seat opposite him, the sound of her chair scraping against the floor feeling louder than it should have. "Ms. Collins," Richard said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. He looked at her for the first time, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Emma managed a nervous smile, but her throat tightened, making it hard to speak. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. I wasn't sure what to expect." She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "But I'm glad to be here." Richard studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering before he nodded. He motioned to the waiter, who quickly brought over 2 glasses of water. As the waiter left, Richard leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, an almost regal gesture. "I'm not in the habit of meeting people from my past life, Emma," he began, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of authority. "But after what happened yesterday, I found myself thinking." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "What you did for Leo, it wasn't just a simple act of kindness. It was something more." Emma blinked, unsure of what he meant. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Blackwood. I just helped him." "No," Richard replied, his voice sharp but not unkind. "You saw him. Really saw him. Most people don't. Most people look at him, and they see a disability, a burden. But you saw beyond that. You recognized the person inside. That's rare." He looked at her intently, his eyes searching her face. "I'm not sure why, but I felt that you understood something I've been missing for a long time." Emma's heart raced as she absorbed his words. "I don't understand," she said softly. "I didn't do anything special. I just felt for him. He's a person, just like anyone else." Richard's eyes softened, and for a brief moment Emma saw something vulnerable in them, something that made him seem less like the untouchable billionaire and more like a man grappling with a deep, personal pain. "I know what you mean," Richard said, his voice quieter now. "But it's not just Leo. It's me too. I've spent my whole life building an empire, accumulating wealth, trying to control everything around me. But what have I really gained? What's the point of all this money if I can't even connect with the people I care about? If I can't even understand my own son?" Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always imagined that people like Richard had everything figured out, that money and success would bring them fulfillment. But in that moment, she realized how empty his life must have felt, how lonely he must have been despite all his wealth. She couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. "I'm sorry," she said gently, unsure of what else to say. "I can't imagine what it's like to be in your position." Richard shook his head. "I don't want sympathy, Emma. I want change. I want to be a better father to Leo, a better person to the people around me. And that's where you come in." Emma's brow furrowed, confusion evident in her eyes. "Me? I don't understand. What could I possibly do to help you?" Richard leaned forward, his expression intense. "I've been thinking about the way you interacted with Leo. You saw him. You didn't pity him. You didn't treat him like a burden. And that's something I've failed to do for years. I need someone like you to help me see him for who he really is, not as a child with a disability, but as a person, as my son." Emma felt a wave of emotions flood over her. She was just a waitress. What could she possibly offer Richard Blackwood that he didn't already have? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the desperation there. It wasn't about money or power. It was about something deeper, a need for connection, for understanding. "What are you asking?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Richard hesitated, then spoke slowly, almost as if testing the waters. "I want you to work with me. I want you to help me reconnect with Leo. I want you to show me how to be a better father. I don't know where to start, but you saw something in him that no one else has. You saw his humanity, and that's something I've forgotten how to do." Emma sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. She had never imagined that a conversation like this would take place, especially not with someone like Richard Blackwood. It was a request she never could have anticipated, and yet there was something about it that felt right. She could help him. She could help them both. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be a quick fix, and it would require her to open up in ways she hadn't done before. But maybe, just maybe, this was her chance. Her chance to make a real difference, not just for Leo, but for herself too. "I'll help you," she said finally, her voice firm but gentle. "But you have to understand that it's not going to be easy. It will take time, patience, and a willingness to change. You'll have to learn to let go of the way you've always seen things." Richard nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." And with those words, something shifted between them. In that moment, Emma realized that this meeting wasn't just about helping Richard. It was about both of them. It was about finding a new way forward, a way to truly live and connect with the world around them. As they continued to talk, Emma felt a sense of purpose stir inside her, a purpose that she had never felt before. The journey ahead would be long, and the road would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And somehow, she knew that this was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were an intense whirlwind of change, both for Emma and for Richard. It was as if a door had been opened that neither of them could shut, no matter how much they tried. Emma quickly found herself becoming an integral part of the Blackwood family in a way she never could have imagined. The first few meetings between her and Richard were challenging, to say the least. She had to get used to the opulence of his world, the luxury that had always seemed so foreign to her. Richard, despite his immense wealth, was often uncomfortable in his own skin. Emma could sense his vulnerability in those early days, though he did his best to hide it behind the sharpness of his business acumen and the unapproachable aura that came with being a billionaire. But as they spent more time together, he began to open up, revealing more about his life, his mistakes, and the distance he had felt from Leo for years. The more Emma listened, the more she understood why Richard had become the way he was. The weight of his expectations, the constant pressure to succeed, and the intense isolation that came with his status. All of it had shaped him into a man who struggled to connect with the most important people in his life. Emma's role, though unclear at first, gradually became more defined. She wasn't just there to help Richard understand his son. She was there to remind him of what truly mattered, to show him that there was more to life than wealth, power, and status. It was a delicate dance, one step forward, two steps back. Richard had moments of deep self-reflection, followed by periods of frustration when he couldn't seem to reach Leo in the way he desperately wanted. But Emma stood by him, never wavering in her belief that change was possible, even if it took time. Leo, for his part, remained a puzzle to Richard. The young boy had a way of retreating into himself, of pulling away from the world around him, even when his father tried to break through. It wasn't that Leo didn't want to connect. It was just that the world had been so unkind to him for so long that he had learned to protect himself by keeping his distance. Emma understood this instinctively, having witnessed it in many people who had been hurt too much. It was the wall they built around their hearts, hoping to keep out the pain. But she knew deep down that Leo's heart was pure, just like any other child's. And so, Emma began spending more time with Leo on her own. She didn't push him. Instead, she gave him the space he needed, allowing him to come to her in his own time. They would take walks through the park or sit quietly together in the large library of the Blackwood estate, sharing simple moments. Sometimes Emma would read to him, her voice soft and soothing as she spoke of worlds far away, stories of bravery, of kindness, of heroes who overcame insurmountable odds. She saw the way his eyes would light up when she read a particularly exciting part, and in those moments she felt the connection between them grow. It wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As Emma and Leo's bond deepened, Richard began to notice the changes in his son. Leo was opening up, slowly but surely. He was still reserved, still had moments of intense shyness, but there was something different about him now. He was more engaged with the world around him. He smiled more often. He started to speak more, even if only in short sentences, and his eyes no longer seemed so distant. Richard could see it. His son was beginning to trust again, and it was all because of Emma's unwavering patience and kindness. But it wasn't just Leo who was changing. Richard himself was going through his own transformation. His interactions with his son became more genuine, more heartfelt. He stopped trying to force Leo to meet his expectations, and instead began to meet him where he was. He learned to really listen, to the quiet moments when Leo expressed his needs, and to respect the boundaries his son had set for himself. Emma played a crucial role in helping Richard navigate this delicate process. She was more than just a guide for Leo. She was the bridge between Richard and his son. The more time Richard spent with Leo under Emma's guidance, the more he realized how much he had missed in his pursuit of success. He had spent so many years thinking that his wealth could solve all problems, but now he was finally understanding that it was the simple things, the quiet moments, the bonds of love, that truly made life meaningful. One evening, as they sat in the living room together, Richard turned to Emma with a look of gratitude in his eyes that she had never seen before. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly, his voice cracking slightly. "You've done something for Leo that I couldn't do. You've given him the one thing I couldn't, a sense of security, a sense of belonging. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for that." Emma smiled, her heart full of warmth. "You don't need to repay me," she said gently. "You've already done something incredible. You're starting to see him for who he really is. That's all that matters." Richard's eyes held hers for a long moment before he looked away, his expression becoming distant once again. "I've spent so much time trying to fix things," he said, his voice quiet. "But maybe what I really needed was to accept that I can't fix everything. I can't change the past, but I can start anew. I can be a better father, a better person. And that's what you've shown me." Emma felt a deep sense of pride, but also a sense of awe. Richard Blackwood, the man who had everything, was finally coming to terms with the fact that he couldn't control everything. That there were some things, like love, like family, that couldn't be fixed with money or power. For the first time, she saw the true strength of his character, his willingness to change, to admit his shortcomings, and to embrace a new path. As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself spending more time with Richard and Leo, not out of obligation, but because she had grown attached to them both. They had become a part of her life in a way she hadn't expected, and it felt right. She had always believed that the purpose of life was to help others, to make a difference where she could. And now, she was living that purpose. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. One afternoon, as Emma and Leo sat in the park near the Blackwood estate, Richard joined them, his hands in his pockets, as he surveyed the scene. Leo was laughing as he ran through the grass, chasing after a butterfly, and Emma watched him with a soft smile on her face. For the first time, Richard felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of contentment, of peace. "I never thought I'd see him like this," Richard said, his voice low but full of emotion. "He's actually happy." Emma glanced up at him, her smile warm. "He's always had it in him," she said. "He just needed someone to help him see it." Richard nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling on him. "And you helped him see it," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You've helped me see it too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply watched as Leo ran through the grass, his laughter echoing in the air. It was a sound Richard had almost forgotten, a sound that reminded him of the simple joys of life, the moments that couldn't be bought or controlled. In that moment, Richard realized something profound. Happiness wasn't something he could buy or manufacture. It was something that had to be earned, something that came from within. "Thank you, Emma," Richard said quietly, "for everything." Emma turned to him, her expression soft. "You don't need to thank me. You're doing it yourself. You're the one who's changing." Richard smiled faintly, but there was a deep sense of peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Maybe," he said, "but I wouldn't have been able to do it without you." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She had made a difference in someone's life, 2 people's lives, actually, and that made it all worth it. She had stepped into their world, and they had stepped into hers, and together, they were beginning to create something beautiful. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that, Emma knew, was the most important thing of all. As she looked at Richard and Leo, standing together in the park, she felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And no matter what came next, she was ready. As the days stretched on, Emma found herself growing more and more intertwined in the fabric of the Blackwood family. Her bond with Leo deepened, and her connection with Richard, though still fragile at times, was undeniably strong. They shared meals, conversations, and moments of quiet reflection. Richard, once a man consumed by his empire, had begun to see his life through a different lens. It was a gradual shift, but Emma could feel it in every interaction he had with his son. There were no longer just awkward silences or strained smiles between them. Richard had begun to understand his son in ways he hadn't thought possible. They were learning to navigate their relationship, step by hesitant step, and Emma was there, gently guiding them both, without even realizing how deeply she had become a part of their lives. One evening, after dinner, as they sat in the garden under the soft light of the outdoor lanterns, Emma could sense a change in Richard. There was something different about him, a quiet, contented energy that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't the man who had once been so desperate for control, so consumed by his ambition. Now he was someone who had come to understand that true success wasn't about wealth or power. It was about connection, about being present for those who mattered most. Leo sat beside him on the bench, his small hand resting gently in his father's, and Emma could see the subtle, but undeniable, closeness that had blossomed between them. "I never thought I'd see this," Richard said, breaking the silence as he gazed at Leo, who was smiling softly up at him. Emma glanced at them both, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Neither did I," she said quietly. "But sometimes it takes time for things to change." Richard's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a true sense of appreciation in them. "You've done something for me, for us, that I could never have done on my own," he said. "I've spent so many years focused on the wrong things. But I'm starting to see what really matters. It's not just about the money or the power. It's about being there for the people you love. It's about giving them the time and attention they deserve." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You're doing it yourself," she said softly. "You've just needed the right perspective to see it." Richard looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe. But I'm not sure I would have found that perspective without you." He paused, his voice lowering slightly. And I'm not sure what I would have done if you hadn't come into our lives." For a moment, the air between them seemed to hang heavy with unspoken words. Emma could feel the depth of what he was saying, the sincerity behind his words. She had never expected any gratitude from Richard. She hadn't come into their lives for that. But hearing it from him, hearing him acknowledge her role in his transformation, was something she hadn't expected. And it was deeply humbling. Before she could respond, Leo tugged at her sleeve, his big, wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Emma," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper, "will you read to me tonight?" Emma's heart melted at the sound of his voice, so small and sincere. She nodded, giving him a warm smile. "Of course, Leo. What would you like me to read tonight?" Leo hesitated for a moment, then pointed to a book resting on the small table nearby. It was one of the stories Emma had read to him before, a tale of adventure, of a young hero who fought for what was right. Emma opened the book, flipping through the pages until she found the place they had left off. As she began to read aloud, Richard watched them both, a quiet sense of wonder in his eyes. He had always known that his son was bright, but seeing Leo so captivated by the story, so engaged in the world Emma had created with her words, was a revelation. This was his son. This was the boy who had once been so closed off, so distant. And now, here he was, thriving in a world of imagination, a world he had never really allowed himself to fully experience. Richard felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had been so focused on the idea of fixing Leo, of changing him, that he had missed the most important thing. Leo was already perfect just as he was. It was Richard who needed to change, not his son. Leo's spirit had always been there, just waiting for someone to nurture it, to allow it to grow. As Emma finished the story, Leo let out a contented sigh, his small body curling up against her. "That was my favorite part," he said, his voice drowsy with sleep. Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. "I'm glad you liked it, Leo," she said softly. "We can finish the rest tomorrow." Leo yawned, nodding in agreement. "Tomorrow," he whispered, before closing his eyes and drifting off to sleep in her arms. Richard remained silent, his gaze fixed on his son. For a long while he didn't speak, his mind lost in thought. The shift in him was palpable, a quiet storm brewing inside him. But this time it wasn't the storm of regret or guilt. It was the storm of understanding, of clarity. He had finally come to terms with the truth. His wealth, his status, none of it could replace the love and connection he had with his son. Emma had shown him that not through words, but through her actions, her unwavering commitment to his family. And now, as he looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in Emma's arms, Richard knew he had found something far more precious than anything money could buy. He had found a sense of peace, a fulfillment that had eluded him for so long. "Thank you," Richard finally said, his voice low but sincere. "For everything, Emma." Emma looked up at him, her heart full. "It wasn't me," she said gently. "You've done all the hard work. You're the one who's changed." Richard shook his head, his expression softening. "No," he said quietly. "I never would have changed if it weren't for you. You came into our lives at just the right time, and you've made all the difference. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "You've done it yourself. You've found what truly matters. That's all that matters." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They simply sat in the quiet of the garden, the soft rustle of the trees in the breeze filling the silence. It was peaceful, perfect, and for the first time, Emma felt truly at home. She had come into their lives as an outsider, a stranger with no expectations, no ulterior motives. But now, she was a part of their story, of Richard's journey, of Leo's growth, and of their shared future. As the night wore on, Richard and Emma shared a quiet conversation, reflecting on the journey they had been on, the challenges they had overcome, and the way their lives had changed. And in that moment, Emma realized something profound. Her purpose wasn't just about changing other people's lives. It was about allowing herself to be changed as well. She had come into the Blackwood family to help them, but in doing so, she had found her own path, her own purpose, and a deep sense of fulfillment that she hadn't known she was searching for. The next morning, as Emma watched Richard and Leo share a quiet breakfast together, she felt a sense of contentment settle over her. It had been a long road, but it had led her here, to this moment of peace. And as she looked at the two of them, she knew that, no matter what the future held, she had made a difference. Not just in their lives, but in her own. And so, as the sun rose over the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the garden, Emma took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. She had found her place in this world, and for the first time in a long time, she was truly at peace.